The most popular spot is the next island, Santa Cruz Island, where we have our highest visitor use capacity. That's a watchword. Not all parks have that. Create daily use limits just to keep the crowds down and try to keep everyone's experience level high, right? And, create those impressions where people have a meaningful connection to the space. That's what we're here for. San Miguel Island, you're going to have to do a beach landing. If you've ever seen a Navy SEALs movie or something like that, you're going to feel pretty cool. You're going to jump in that boat. They're going to put you right over the waves, and then they're going to throw your stuff in a waterproof bag to you. You're going to catch it.
No way.
And you're going to wave goodbye to your boat for several days.
I think it's cool to see the people who have been at the park for so long because, just the knowledge that they have is undeniable. So that's really beautiful.
I've got to say, that has been personally the most rewarding part of managing this really wonderful national park.
Welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where we uncover the untold stories of our national parks. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice. Gear for adventure with Expert Voice, the outdoor gear source for industry experts. Outdoor brands like Big Agnes, Mammoth, La Sportiva, Chaco, and more offer discounts on Expert Voice of up to 60% off for industry experts like you. And you can join Expert Voice for free today and see what brands you qualify for. So, whatever the next adventure calls for, make sure you're prepared with expertvoice.com/parks and gear up for adventure. If you like chocolate, which may be a red flag if you don't, you have to try out Ritual Chocolate. Ritual Chocolate is my favorite chocolate brand by far, and I learned about them from spending a lot of time in Park City, Utah, where they're based nearby, and actually got to take my family to a chocolate tasting at their factory. And it totally changed the way we all think about and eat small batch chocolate. While I already loved the bars, it opened up my world to the variety and depth of flavor profiles chocolate can have. I'm excited to be sharing this with you all. Who Runs This Park listeners get 10% off their online purchases of Ritual Chocolate. Go to ritualchocolate.com, that's RITUAL chocolate.com, and use promo code WRTP for 10% off. You'll be thanking me later, I promise. And did I mention that I'm obsessed with their packaging? It's so beautiful, so even just having the bars and opening them is a treat. Get on it and order some chocolate. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Who Runs This Park, a podcast where you are invited into the hearts and stories of those who have committed their careers to the protection and preservation of our great national parks. Who Runs This Park aims to be a catalyst for inspiration, exploration, and appreciation of our world's natural beauty. Today, we have Ethan McKinley with us, Channel Islands National Park Superintendent. Channel Islands is referred to as the Galapagos of North America due to its unique biodiversity and isolation. The park is located 160 miles offshore from Santa Barbara in California and has 5 islands that make up the park boundaries and boasts a wide variety of activities from scuba diving to hiking to camping. Ethan himself has been superintendent since 2019, being one of the Park Service's youngest superintendents. What an honor. In addition to his position at Channel Islands, he has worked at parks across the country and even got to start a park from the ground up in Delaware. Ethan's love for the outdoors comes through in the way he cares for Channel Islands, and I'm beyond excited to learn more about his story and about Channel Islands National Park. Ethan, welcome to Who Runs This Park. We're excited to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Maddie. Honored to be here. Thank you for the generous introduction there.
Yeah, of course.
Very happy to be in service of these parks. And one correction, because it's an important one. We're about 14 to 60 miles offshore on our islands, listeners here.
Okay, thank you.
And so that's anywhere between about an hour to about 4 hours by boat.
Oh, I see. I was getting the depth of the islands range. Okay, so you said located 14 to 16 miles offshore?
60. So I see where you got the 60. Yeah. So 60.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So the park is located 60 miles offshore from Santa Barbara. I would love for you to take some time to kind of set up the geography of Channel Islands, like the different island makeups and just kind of what we're working with. When a visitor goes to Channel Islands, what can they expect to see and experience?
So Channel Islands National Park, like you mentioned, is referred to as the Galapagos of North America with good reason. We have about 140 endemic species. That means they can't be found anywhere else in the world. And that unique composition of species is reflective of the environments they live in and how they've speciated, so how they've become different, evolving over time. And so each one of these islands has never been connected to the mainland of California. So it's been a long time for these species to develop in their own environment. And that really sets the stage for what you're going to see when you're out there. So let's start in the south. So about 40 miles from Ventura, you can get to Santa Barbara Island. which is only about a square mile, but has some of the best pelagic or ocean-going bird habitat in the world. It's completely covered by nests nearly, and you'll see all kinds of species of birds, and it's a critical habitat for them. It's hard to get to. It's currently closed because we're rebuilding the wharf or the pier structure there. It's in the open ocean. It's for the rugged and those looking for an adventure. If you have your own boat, once it's open, you can get out there. But it's our least visited island because of how hard it is to get to. Working your way up, Anacapa Island is much easier to get to. It's only about an hour away from the mainland. You can get there by concessionaire vessel. That's Island Packers. It takes about 98% of the people out to the islands. They're great. You'll do some whale watching and some dolphin watching on your way out. You'll get there. You're going to see a lot of birds. But as you get off the boat, you also want to look down because you'll see some of this wonderful, pristine kelp forest as well. And that's one of the other things that makes this park very unique. It's not just land, it's also sea. So we have 250,000 acres. About half of that is on land, and about half of that is in the oceans. And we have direct and indirect protections over those ocean waters. So Anacapa has a lighthouse. It has Inspiration Point. It's where you want to go to kind of get your iconic shot of the Channel Islands. The most popular spot is the next island, Santa Cruz Island, where you'll go to Scorpion, where we have our highest visitor use capacity. So that's a watchword. Not all parks have that. You're starting to see parks like Yosemite create daily use limits just to keep the crowds down and try to keep everyone's experience level high, right? And, create those impressions where people have a meaningful connection to the space. That's what we're here for, inspiring future generations, right? So they thought that out before this park was created. So this park was created in 1980, way after Yosemite was created in the 1800s. So we have use limits. So you're never going to get a Yosemite Valley crowd, not to pick on Yosemite. But we have at Scorpion, the daily use limit's about 500. So that's the most generous we have in terms of allowing people. But it has, therefore, our most popular trails. Snorkeling. We have kayaking out there, some of the best sea kayaking you're going to find, especially in the mainland United States. You can go to sea caves that are, these volcanic sea caves that are just dramatic, dark, beautiful. The water's going to be clear and green on some days. You're going to see kelp forest. You'll see lots of sea lions, probably some dolphins will swim alongside you. You'll see sheephead, which are these really cool species that are apex predators within the kelp forest environment. Moving on out are Santa Rosa, and further on out is San Miguel. And the further out you go, the idea is that the more rugged the experience is. Santa Cruz Island's a lot like a family camping environment. It's okay to bring kids. You can drag your cooler if you really feel like doing that, and you're not kind of the backpacking type. You don't have to have your things dialed down to be the absolute minimum. Santa Rosa Island's a different story. You've got to hike about 1.5 miles to get to your campsite, so that means you pretty much have to be backpacker ready. San Miguel Island, you're going to have to do a beach landing, and that's going to be hopping in the main boat, the big comfortable boat you go out on there or out to the islands with, and you're going to have to get into a skiff. And a skiff is a smaller, rigid hull inflatable boat, right? If you've ever seen a Navy SEALs movie or something like that, you're going to feel pretty cool. You're going to jump in that boat. They're going to put you right over the waves, and then they're going to throw your stuff in a waterproof bag to you. You're going to catch it.
No way.
And you're going to wave goodbye to your boat for several days. And that's how you got onto San Miguel Island. And San Miguel Island's also closed right now due to some storm damage, but we're hoping to open it up in a few months. So that's the range of experiences. You can really do so many things out there. And I didn't even get into the scuba diving and snorkeling and all of that.
I think the unique nature of Channel Islands in the park system was why I wanted to kind of start the interview that way, of just kind of framing, I think, some of the unique aspects of experiences you can have in Channel Islands. And so then as we continue to talk about it, people have this concept of like, just, what we're working with in a sense. A way that I typically like to start the interviews is by understanding your role as superintendent. So I'd love to hear, you've been there since 2019. What's one of the craziest situations you've dealt with as Channel Islands superintendent?
I think there's so many unique situations you find yourself in at Channel Islands National Park in particular. All national parks, by definition, are unique and nationally significant. You have to meet those two criteria, right? Some are unique-er. And Channel Islands National Park, a good way to think about it is an Alaskan-style national park just off the coast of Southern California and a megalopolis that is 23 million people or so. And so we have these wilderness and logistical problems that you'd find a Alaskan National Park. And I can give you a couple of great examples. So we've had things like wildland fire, where that's a big problem and a big topic of conversation, especially in the American West right now. And on mainland California, it's hard enough to fight those fires, right? But you add an island factor to it, and it gets pretty crazy. We have a 1950s landing craft Marine, which was used by the Navy and is a Korean War vessel or Korean War era vessel that we have kept running all these years. Rangers are they have a lot of gumption, and they tend to use things for a long time in lieu of buying new things. So this vessel will go all of 8 knots, which is 8 nautical miles per hour, which is very, very slow for a boat out to the islands and back, but it carries heavy things and it can land on beaches. And so that's how we get all of our vehicles to and from the island, including other things like water and the like too. Some of the islands need water pumped onto them because they don't have water. So in the event of this fire that happened a few years back, we had to get there quickly. So we had to mobilize hot shots, which are elite firefighters from the Los Padres National Forest. And luckily they were available, and it was daytime, so they were awake and ready, and they loaded up in their engines and came on down. And we had to get our captains in to take the landing craft over to the ramp, load up the firefighting vehicles, and then the crews went to Island Packers and got out there as quickly as they could to set up. And essentially from the time of the alarm going off, we have a fire, it's on an island. Our policy is absolute suppression. Do everything you can, throw everything you can at it before it burns the island. And the time they were able to get on the firefight was a little over 4 hours. And that would be a very, very long, unideal response on the mainland. But on the island, it was the absolute best case scenario. So I think there's every facet of that when it comes to people that are in trouble, fires, emergencies, whatever it might be, where the time you make the call and say, I've got an emergency, we need help, to the time help shows up is a long lag period. Luckily, that fire was well contained. We had all the air assets on it very early. So planes coming from all over the state, and we were able to get it down, lay down the fire and contain it. And now the area is nice and lush and green and everything's fine. But that was a pretty crazy event.
So to clarify, for the Marine, like for the vessel, are fire trucks essentially being like transported to the island essentially?
Yes.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Let me give you some scale here, because I think that might be helpful. When I first visited the islands way back a decade and a half ago now, just for fun, just to go out and kayak and backpack, I had no idea what the scale was. It's hard to imagine. So I can give you some idea of that. So Santa Cruz Island, where this fire was, is the largest of the Channel Islands off the coast of California, of which there are 8 total. We've talked about 5 that are in the national park, but there are 8 total. The Navy has 2 of them. And one of them is Catalina Island, which is kind of a tourist attraction, right?
Didn't realize Catalina Island was a part of the Channel Islands.
Yeah, it's a part of the California Channel Islands, but not Channel Islands.
But not right, correct. Okay.
Yeah, so we've got 5 of the 8, which is great. And we've got the biggest one, which is Santa Cruz Island, which we own jointly with the Nature Conservancy. It's 96 square miles and about 22 miles long. So that's really, really quite large. It's several Manhattans. For example.
Oh, I like that. That's a fun. Just place a bunch of Manhattans and then you've got the island.
You need trucks. You need vehicles to move things around. And so, yeah, we had several fire engines taken out there along with the crews.
What is the road system like? Like, are there roads throughout? It sounds like there's some parks where there might not even be any roads, but for that, some islands. But for that, is there like a road system throughout the whole park?
On the larger islands, yeah. So San Miguel, Santa Rosa, and Santa Cruz all have road systems of some type. Santa Barbara's too small because it's that 1 mile. Anacapa even has like a little bit of sort of utility road on it. But no, there's from the ranching era, of which all of these islands were a part, those roads were developed to manage the ranches essentially. And so we're in the national park era now, and we're trying to reduce our footprint as much as possible to allow the terrain and the habitat to recover from earlier uses. I should mention, though, that the national park era and the ranching era predecessor of those was the Native American era, where we have over 13,000 years of human history on these islands, which is the oldest human remains found in North America. That's a little known fact, yeah. And so it's a tremendous amount of history, and a lot of that we're just beginning to incorporate at the right level into our storytelling.
I think you did maybe a press conference or something right around the time that you started as superintendent, and it was talking about, what are your goals for Channel Islands, and one of them being highlighting that storytelling nature and so it sounds like from the indigenous perspective and then also highlighting the ranching perspective and just telling these stories of Channel Islands before it became the national park. That's really cool.
You did your research. That's reaching way back. I appreciate it.
Yeah. I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of what you all are working on from a storytelling perspective in terms of what is part of that. We obviously don't have time to go into all of it, but what is a major part of like the Native American story on the islands? And then I actually don't know a ton about the ranching era in the islands either.
Well, let's start with the first part of it. The Native American stories on these islands are Chumash stories, and to the south, Tongva Gabrielino band stories. We have, I would say, a thriving and growing relationship with our traditionally associated peoples and our federally affiliated tribe, the San Ynez Band of Chumash Indians. It's north of Santa Barbara and San Ynez. And that relationship, I've got to say, that has been personally the most rewarding part of managing this really wonderful national park. In the last 5 years, there's been a huge paradigm shift, not just in the storytelling, but in the way that collections from museums are treated and returned and repatriated to tribes, the way that we interact in terms of not just official, required by law consultation on big planning projects, but almost every aspect of what we do involves the tribal representatives now. And that means, how do we create places that respect the history of the islands? And so that's probably been the fastest paced change. And I think it's a cultural realization writ large. We can't take credit for it. It's wonderful to see and be part of, but it's across our country. The conversation has shifted. You're seeing museums like at UCLA or Berkeley or the Smithsonian, returning collections to tribes, asking for permission instead of taking it. Things like funerary objects, right? Even remains of ancestors being returned to tribes. And, amidst all of that sea change, trying to work with our tribal partners and understand their needs and restore their story to its appropriate place, which was overlooked for decades and decades because it was hard to talk about. And it didn't make us all look good very much. It was hard to find the words to talk about it in a way that I think was connected with people and helped them to take ownership of their history, and also represented that it's not all history, right? We're in this new sort of cultural realization era where we have a modern connection to the tribes. It's contemporary. It's not just history. So a good example is once a year we do a Tomol crossing. Actually got practice for it this Saturday, which is a redwood plank canoe. It's about 2 canoe lengths or eastern canoe lengths. And we have archaeological proof that those have been around for over 7,000 years or so. And the Chumash used these as a rather complex society to travel around between the islands as well as the mainland. Places like Carpinteria were named after the carpenters that the Spanish found on the beach making these tomols, right? Who were Chumash. And so it's a practice that's getting life breathed back into it. And it's really exciting to see. So once a year, those paddlers, the captains, the organizers, folks that are performing ceremonies as part of the crossing, once it reaches the island, they come out. And so it's gotten bigger and bigger each year. It's been about 20 years or so in terms of the practice. And just last year, I'm really proud to say that the partnership has gotten close enough that they invited a park staff member to paddle, which was a huge honor. And I just got lucky enough that I was the one invited. But a lot of that relationship is history and, telling the story of that history. A lot of it's today. The things I'm probably most excited about, aside from restoring that story to where it belongs, is the connection to modern day Indian youth and getting folks out and experiencing these places, reaching within the tribe and outside of the tribe to share those stories too. So it's alive. It's growing.
Are you paddling from Santa Barbara, say, all the way out to the island?
There are multiple shifts, I should clarify. It's almost superhuman to do it all the way. But,
I did a trip in college where we kayaked. I'm from Texas, and there's like the Barrier Islands or something, I forget, on the coast. And we kayaked from like across Matagorda Bay, and it was like 8 miles in a kayak, and I was beat. like so tired. So I was thinking about that experience while you were talking about paddling. And so I'm curious kind of honestly of some of the logistics of shifts and stuff. Are you just resting on the boat while other people are paddling, or do you get taken off the...
Yeah, so there's several support vessels. We've kind of experimented with it over the years. At first, they wanted to keep it as close to the traditional practice as possible. So there were no life vests. Modern electronic beacons and that sort of thing that we use for safety in the water were not being used. So we've adopted modern practices, and we've kind of, I think over the last 20 years, we figured out a way working with the tribe, working with the National Marine Sanctuary that surrounds the islands. It was really the primary partner on that to make it safe. And so life vests are a part of it. There's a big support vessel from the National Marine Sanctuary. We actually have our marine patrol boats that patrol the waters of the park. They're in support if something needs to happen quickly, and they usually do transfers between the large vessel and the smaller plank canoe. Think of a kayak and then think of something that's 10 times as heavy. That's just approximate, but it's made of redwood, right? Thick redwood. It's sealed with pitch from the tar that comes up on the beaches around the Santa Barbara and Carpinteria area.
Interesting.
And then it's woven together with handmade rope to keep those planks nice and tight together. And then there's a whole bunch of sandbags for ballast in the bottom of it. In your hands, you've got a 14 to 16 foot redwood paddle.
That's how long the paddles are?
Yeah, they're insanely long. And so you have to learn this special motion where you're kind of cantilevered out. You've got your arms really far away from you, and you've got this heavy thing in your hands. And I've got to say, I really underestimated it. I saw these gentlemen, the elders, in their late 60s and 70s, paddling out there, no problem. And I thought, gosh, I'm much younger than that.
Yeah, you're like, okay. I've got it.
I got this. And that was foolhardy. They have amazing shoulder strength, and while we were training together, they were outlasting me easily. So we had a really wonderful crossing. When we got to the islands, and then we can kind of move on from this one, but when we got to the islands, we had a sweat lodge, bear dance. That's a very sacred dance. It's kind of a combination of traditions, because a lot of the traditions got fractured and broken as the tribes were pushed to reservations, as a lot of death happened among the native tribes. A lot of the stories that got handed down orally did not make it through. So you'll see tribes combining stories sometimes, like the bear dance tradition, that get practiced through to this day. It's what they have, right? And the bear dance is essentially a healing dance for the land. So they invited park staff and marine sanctuary staff into that, and it was a wonderful experience. Yeah,
that's really cool. Thank you for sharing about that. I do want to, because one thing I think is really unique from your experience, before we jump more into talking about Channel Islands, is your experience building a new national park from the ground up. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that and how you feel it prepared you to your current position now as Channel Islands Superintendent.
Sure. The First State National Historical Park, probably still many haven't heard of because it's so young, was established in 2013 as a national monument. In 2014, it got its National Historical Park status, which was essentially going from just an executive order to a full congressional national park declaration. So it's 7 units across the state of Delaware. 6 of those units are partner run. 1 is not. And we had to figure out, as you can imagine, a lot of sort of agreements. How are we going to do this together? What does this site mean to the overall story of the park? How do we combine 7 different units to tell an overarching story of the first state? And there were stories like that I hadn't read a lot about in the history books and were totally undercovered in our
That's
U.S.
really cool.
history curriculum.
Yeah.
Like New Sweden. And New Sweden was this brand new European colony that encompassed Philadelphia and Delaware all at the same time. And there were actually battles between New Amsterdam, which was Manhattan, right? And the Dutch and the Swedish.
Really?
and associated and affiliated tribes that were fighting on either's behalf against the others. And so it was really fascinating, the chapters of American history that happened there. And the values that they carried were quite different than New England, for example. New Sweden introduced one of the first African Americans to the New World. And, that person, Africans, not African American at the time, that person became a captain or a pilot for New Sweden. So there are all these stories that were just like begging to be told, right? And we had all these new communities surrounding these units. lots of excitement. And guess how many staff members we had?
My guess is you had fewer than you needed. Yeah.
2 of us. There were 2 of us to live up to all these expectations and excitement. The 2 of us wanted to do that passionately and exuberantly.
Right, of course.
And we did. And we worked really long hours, and we tried so hard to address all the concerns, from cleaning toilets to, creating new parking lots, to managing trails and situations that were going on in the unit that we were managing ourselves, to figuring out how to take care of 20 residences we had in that unit, onto how do we get a visitor center? How do we line up for that? And how do we work with our partners? It would have been a full-time job to really do it right at each one of those units, much less trying to do the whole thing at the same time with a super small staff. And that's a new national park. That's how it starts. That was kind of the lesson learned, was you learn about every single facet. I imagine it's quite a lot like starting a new company. You're going to learn about accounting. You're going to learn about personnel. You're going to learn about
what I'm doing right now.
Oh, great.
I literally was on the phone with comptroller of Texas trying to understand sales and use tax law so that I'm properly, any event is a proper accounting event. And so I feel that of
so Maddie, I
know I have the experience.
And now that transition from First State, where we're doing it, brick by brick, really grassroots as much as we can. Sometimes, getting overwhelmed by the immediate needs of taking care of visitors and, spending less time in that strategic zone. Sometimes really thinking about the future of the park. We were able to somehow pull it all together. And so
that's how it usually goes, is somehow things, you're I don't know how, but it somehow usually gets pulled together.
And now First State's thriving. It's really wonderful to see. Their team is phenomenal. It's bigger and growing. They just cut the ribbon on a new visitor center that was long in the making. And, we kind of laid the groundwork for some of the project recruitment and getting it funded. But that takes years and years and years. And so it's, everyone had a role to play. And everyone, I think, was really excited about seeing that park succeed. And so it's got a bright future. Lots of community that supports it. And if you're in Delaware, go check it out. I mean, it's really fun to go see a new national park. Don't expect it to be the polished thing that is Yosemite. They had a lot of years to do that, but do check it out. Gosh, I keep on picking on Yosemite, don't I?
It's okay. I think you used to work there, so you have experience. It's high in the brain,
And it's okay. And as it relates to Channel Islands, I mean, Channel Islands is a much larger park. We have over 70 employees on the books at peak season. It's considered a medium-sized national park, but highly complex based upon all the logistics and stuff we were talking about, right? Not to mention the really unique ecosystem. So I have a lot more to manage here, but it's different. I've got a team of managers that work with me. We meet all the time, and they're fantastic. You find this dedication level among park staff, which I'm sensing. That's probably why you're doing this podcast. We get really excited about what we do. I can say that's alive and well here at Channel Islands National Park. We have a lot of people spend 30 or 40 years working at this park in particular, just because it's so special.
Yeah, I think I've seen that across all the parks, really, is just people, dare I say, they're lifers at a park. And I think especially my generation being so working here for 2 years, working there for a year, working here for 3 years, just so, and I fall into that. I'm okay, I'm bored. What's next?
We're here for you too. I mean, we have a lot of people come through in internships, and a lot of people come through with seasonal jobs and get a taste, and they're yeah, and this is inspiring me to go do something else, and that's great. But yeah,
I think it's cool to see the people who have been at the parks for at a specific park for so long, because I mean, just the knowledge that they have is undeniable. So that's really beautiful. One kind of, you mentioned just some unique stuff about the ecosystem. Something I saw was that Channel Islands has a biosecurity program. And I was curious about that. I've never heard of that. And I think you all work with the Navy as well. And then you said the Navy has 2 of the islands. So I'd just love to hear a little bit more about that.
3 technically, but I can explain that one. We have San Miguel Island in the national park is actually owned by the Navy.
Interesting.
Which is
okay.
A complexity.
I mean, the list of complex things is never ending.
It's another partnership to manage, and it's a very good one. They're actually coming here later today. We're behind on a few fronts as a country in terms of conservation. I think we quickly realize as we're repairing these islands from previous different uses, right? So uses that brought the ranching era, for example, that had, this wonderful period on the islands that did a lot of great things for the families engaged and created a lot of wonderful history there. They also introduced, there's a lot of invasive species and a lot of damage to the land for the native species as well. So we're doing things across the board that are recovering those islands and getting them back to their current, or, to their level of, sort of pre-European contact, right? Trying to get them back to as many native species as possible, recover those ecosystems, make them as self-sustainable as possible, and then get out. That's typically how the Park Service approaches conservation. Is we don't want to be overly interventionalist, but we do want to intervene if there's been a human-caused and major disturbance to the ecosystem. So we know we've got all of these 140 endemic species, right? We've got the Galapagos of North America. There's been some damage done. We want to repair it, and we need to sort of stem the chances for future damage. And that is biosecurity. So biosecurity is ensuring that those folks that are embarking out to the islands are not bringing with them any introduced species. And when I say species, I mean the gamut, right? So it could be an ant in your backpack. It could be a seed that's going to germinate on the bottom of your boot, that you just went hiking with, somewhere nearby or across the world. It could be, a rat on a boat, which I know gross, right? But like that's still.
I lived in New York. It's par for the course.
And we actually have some tools there. We're short on them right now, and we're trying to raise awareness of this. It's going to take everybody to make this work. So as we're fighting back those invasive species on the islands, we're doing active restoration. We're spending millions and millions of dollars over the years to try to make these islands as biosecure as possible and restore the habitat. We're trying to reach out to folks and ask them to do their part, essentially. So in the coming months, we're actually going to put a New Zealand designed, and they're way ahead of us, right? A New Zealand designed biosecurity station that actually has spray that comes up on the bottom of your boot. It's anti-germination, so it'll kill the possibility of those seeds, even if they're there from establishing on the islands. It'll have some education up around it for each of our visitors to understand what biosecurity is. And I think we got to come up with a better name too, Maddie. Like, biosecurity sounds like there's been an outbreak or something.
It mixes because it's I was intrigued and I had to ask about it because it is this, I don't know the right word, but I was curious. That's why I was like, I got to get more information on biosecurity because it sounds maybe scarier than it actually is.
Yeah, it sounds like something you'd find in like the Fallout series, right? It's sort of post-apocalyptic sounding thing. And we're taking it really seriously. We actually have the Nature Conservancies put up cameras that are running off of a mesh network, which is like a high-speed network that allows for essentially those cameras to do all the computer calculations right there and at high speed. And they are doing live tracking of using AI of species that might be coming on land where we have piers and docks, right? So if a rat came onto the land, hopefully one of our tracking cameras would pick it up, and we have a whole eradication policy that would cause immediate action. We would go out there, we try to, locate that individual, and hopefully they wouldn't have bred by then, and we're not dealing with a full population. That's the level that it's getting to. And we're finding out, it's kind of that old saying, an ounce of prevention, a pound of cure, right?
Yeah. You're making me think of one of my earlier interviews was with the Voyager's superintendent. And we were talking about how prevention is a lot less expensive than restoration. And obviously we don't always have that luxury. Sometimes we have to just deal with restoration and stuff like that. But I think if you can front load the effort in areas, it will pay off. And if we're just being really mathematical about it, from a resourcing perspective, it will, a financial resource, restoration takes a lot of money. If we're just following the money, which is sometimes just easy to do, even from that perspective, prevention is
you're
a benefit.
Speaking my language, Maddie.
Yeah.
This might all sound kind of like tree hugging stuff, but my degree is actually in business. There is a numerical way to think about how we can be most efficient, maintaining the ideal level of conservation in these parks. And we're having to get there. I think every superintendent in the country, every program manager is really having to think, how can I stretch my dollar? Just because our purchasing power has gone down over the years. So it's a necessity.
Well, and I think every superintendent has kind of hinted at this, or it's just the nature of it, of there's never enough money to fix all the things that you need. And so the more you can stretch what you're given, the better.
Yeah. And I can frame it for you because I get suspicious myself as a bureaucrat when I hear other bureaucrats say, well, we don't have enough money. And because, you hear it all the time, right? In the Park Service, we're at about negative 20% in terms of our total full-time equivalents of FTE employees over the last 10 to 15 years. That's as a whole. So that's taken us down from around 25,000 to 20,000 employees. And that drills down, that stacks up with the parks. So it's not just, folks sitting in Washington or in a regional office. It is seen at the parks in the field. So, for example, we don't have a biosecurity employee anymore. We are trying to run it as a collateral duty among other divisions. Trying to solve for that. We're not giving up on it, but it gets trickier over time.
I think I've heard not that exact number, but that sentiment of that we are down percentage-wise employees, but we're up significantly in visitation. And so that makes it challenging. Those numbers going in opposite directions is not helpful. Can you share a little bit about how Channel Islands, partners with the Navy or what that partnership is like?
So San Miguel Island is owned by the Navy and has been all the way along. We started operating it in the 1960s, and it's a unique operation. So the Navy in previous generations, including World War II, used it as a bombing range. And we still have to this day, everyone that goes out there to lead hikes or, any ranger on the island needs to be trained in unexploded ordnance, which isn't a huge lift, but it certainly catches your attention.
Sounds
right?
Scary.
Don't touch the shiny things, essentially. And
yeah.
So there's been no incident over the years, and all of the trails that we travel on have been thoroughly analyzed for any explosives. So that's a unique aspect.
Very unique.
Managing lands with the Navy has been a really fascinating process. We benefit from each other's science. Believe it or not, the Navy, they have Bill Hoyer down on San Nicolas Island, and he's essentially in charge of the conservation projects on the island, making sure that people slow down for island foxes, making sure that the important species, listed species, for example, are thriving on that island, things that might be threatened or endangered, making sure that message is getting out to all of those Navy individuals, those soldiers that are potentially there as civilians or, enlisted or officers, and probably thinking about something quite different than the island fox because they've got a mission to do, right? So it's been really fascinating. We've shared a lot of notes. We collaborate a tremendous deal in terms of managing those spaces. And it's been a really fascinating partnership. It was much different than I might have imagined when I first moved in. And it's great that they have conservation as, a lead tenet of how they manage land along with the parks.
I love to hear that. You actually had a great segue because you mentioned the island foxes, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your work with them. I know they're an endangered species.
The great news is that today they're actually delisted.
Wow.
So they represent, which is like the goal, right? And the whole point of the Endangered Species Act is to create actions that get them off of the endangered species list, which is a little counterintuitive, but they were essentially impacted over the years by kind of a domino effect that started with DDT, which is really nasty stuff. But we didn't know that back in the 40s, 50s, 60s. DDT was essentially an insecticide, so it would blanket places with this stuff. It would prevent malaria and the like. So you'd see kind of clouds of this stuff being distributed around. Ends up, it's pretty carcinogenic and it's pretty nasty. So the waste that was produced from the Los Angeles area, where this was produced at the highest levels in the world, was just dumped in the ocean, essentially a good deal of it. And so this is, if you want to go back and take a look at things that inspired the Environmental Protection Act and, or the EPA, rather the agency, go take a look at it. I mean, NEPA, EPA, right, this is all done in this era where, we had this sort of revolution against unregulated industry discharge. So go back to that, right? So bad stuff being dumped in the ocean. Think of Acme 55-gallon drums being put a hole in the side, push them overboard. That's a lot of what happened. I mean, it was
I know.
It was exactly that. Kind of maybe where the cartoon
out of sight, out of mind, mentality.
It's in the ocean. It'll be fine. It'll be diluted.
Yeah.
Ends up, it wasn't fine. So the fish would absorb this, and our beautiful native bald eagles on the Channel Islands would eat those fish. They like scaly things, right? So it got to a point where the eagles were actually extirpated, which means that they went extinct locally. So they were no longer on the islands, and we weren't really sure why at the time. Over time, as we started to stand up something that this park has that's very unique, which is we're called a prototype park. And in a nutshell, that means that we inventory and monitor key species throughout the park to ensure their health as an indicator of the overall health of the ecosystem, which sounds simple. It's very hard.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of hours.
You're monitoring the ecosystem on the island, not like
That's right.
Okay, I see.
Underwater and on the islands.
Ooh.
Yeah, so cool twist. We can talk about that a little more, but we're looking, right? Where we're set up to do this in 1980, we start looking at the species, what's going on. In the 90s, we start to see some problems. Our island fox, which is our like most charismatic megafauna, even though max, they're like 5 pounds, adult male. they will fit in a purse if pushed into a purse, which I do not recommend anyone doing.
Oh my God, they're so cute.
They are really, really cute. They are very adorable, but they're also apex predators, so they like to be wild.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yep. They're not afraid of you either. So 90s, the populations start to crash, and absolutely, floor's gone out, rapid decline, and we don't know what's happening. And so there were more influences on this, but I'm going to give you the short story. So we find out that we are at, nearly unsustainable populations, which means that they almost don't have enough genetic diversity among the individuals on the individual islands, which are different species on each island, right? There's subspecies, to maintain an adequately genetically diverse population. So on some islands, we're down to about a dozen foxes. And so on each of the islands, what we do is split the populations into individual breeding colonies. So we have 2 separate breeding colonies on each island that has foxes, and only 3 of our islands have foxes. And so we developed this protocol. We're taking care of them. We're trying to figure out what's going on here. We find out that since those bald eagles left, a couple things had happened. That DDT that had wiped them out left their competitors to move in, golden eagles. And so these mainly terrestrial hunters moved in from the mainland out to the islands, right? And created an imbalance. And we learned that at first they were hunting pigs.
The golden eagles were hunting pigs.
Yeah, little babies.
Wow.
Little piglets. And
nature is brutal.
Yeah, I know it is. And then the pigs were non-native, and so they were removed in the interim as well. Okay. And there's increased pressure on the fox population. So we found out that the bald eagles who liked scaly things, no longer there. The golden eagles who like furry things are there and having a ball. We had to live capture all of the golden eagles, and the pictures are wild. I wasn't here at the time, but imagine helicopters, essentially pillowcases, like going over these things. Can't kill eagles. Like that's not something crazy. People want to see park rangers doing, right? Understandably.
No.
And so
were they being relocated?
Yeah, way far away, as far as we could get, like way in the northern, northeastern corner of California. And luckily they didn't come back. But they didn't come back. Nice. Probably, there's probably, I don't know how hard they tried. We reintroduced bald eagles, and that was a huge effort. And so we brought some down from Alaska, some up from Catalina Island.
Man, if I moved down from Alaska, I'd be like, weather's nice down here.
This is great. Why didn't we come here earlier?
Yeah, like, dang.
The fish has DDT, but no, I'm kidding. We really did have to keep a close eye. We found out what eventually made those bald eagles get extirpated from the islands was the DDT was creating decalcification in their eggs. So instead of those hard shells that you imagine with like a big, eagle eggs are huge, right? So you imagine this big egg that's really hard. The parents can sit on it and incubate it. Everything's fine, right? With a decalcified egg, that structure is soft. So the parents try to do that. It crushes the young, and the species goes extinct, right? They can't reproduce. So we monitor. We want to make sure that this problem doesn't persist. right, in the population, and that DDT in the meantime has hopefully sort of diluted to the point of being innocuous. And it worked. We were able to, there are a lot of twists and turns in that story, but long story short, we reintroduced those populations of island foxes. We monitor them closely to this day. There are now thousands of island foxes out on the islands.
Going from like a dozen to thousands is insane.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It's a wonderful story. It's the fastest mammalian endangered species recovery in history. Happened right here.
That's cool. I do want to be aware of our time. And unfortunately, we're kind of nearing the end of our time together. There's so many areas that we could go off to. And yeah, I feel like we're just opening the can of worms of Channel Islands. But something...
Well, you can call anytime, Maddie. This has been really fun.
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. A way I like to wrap up interviews is, what is something you wish everyone knew about Channel Islands National Park, regardless of if they have or haven't been?
I guess it would be the significance of having a park like this with its internationally significant cultural resources and human history, the stories it has to tell, its wilderness and ecosystems that are some of the most fascinating in the world, and having it all with all the recreation, possibilities therein, just off the coast of Los Angeles. It's right here. I feel so fortunate that we're able to provide access to this quality of a national park this close to so many people, and that it's never going to be overcrowded, right? It's always going to have those visitor use limitations. So I wish they knew more about that. I wish that we had more people that were aware of just what they have here.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it starts here. Hope that's, the goal is bringing more awareness to the different parks within our system. So thank you for inviting us into some of the stories. And yeah, I say this every time, but the bucket list keeps growing. And now I'm like, shoot, I got to get out to Channel Islands.
Well, let me know when you come out here, Maddie. We'll get you out there.
I will. Yes, I appreciate it. Thank you, Ethan.
All right. Take care, Maddie. Thank you.
Thanks so much for listening today. Who Runs This Park is presented by Expert Voice. Our music was composed by Danielle Bees. Don't forget to subscribe down below and tell your friends about it. This ensures that we can continue telling the stories of our national parks. Check out everything Who Runs This Park does at Linktree/Who Runs This Park. That's linktr.ee/Who Runs This Park. I'm Maddie Pellman, and you've been listening to Who Runs This Park.